What is your reaction to Kellyanne Conway, right? This is an anonymous source. This is a senior advisor to the president saying that Ford should be heard, she should have a chance to speak, and everyone should stop insulting her.
I mean, if that's true and that actually is the Trump White House's position, then that's great. But she says a lot of things that aren't necessarily followed up with any action. I'm not confident that this White House actually does believe that this woman should have the chance to speak. That said, if that is actually the White House position, then great. And I hope Republican senators take that on board and that they let Dr. Ford testify.
Evan, explain the calculation, not just inside the White House, but inside the administration. Because if you're Mitch McConnell and you're focused on the midterms and you're this close to getting a nominee through, what do?
Well, right now, the calculation politically is we need to ram this through as hard and fast as possible. The vote is scheduled for Thursday to come out of committee, and they're saying that we can have Dr. Ford testify tomorrow. That means Wednesday we do the quick rebuttals, and then Thursday we ram it through on party lines. The
Let's pick different words than ram, hard, and fast, given what we're talking here.
But from a perspective of the longer this goes and is discussed, the worse it is for Brett Kavanaugh. And the more I've looked at this situation, at first, when I first heard about these allegations and it was anonymous, I felt this was another thing that Democrats were doing to try and derail it. We watched the confirmation hearings be a theater of the absurd with Kamala Harris and Cory Booker beclowning themselves. But then when I read that Washington Post interview, I started to really think about this differently and said, okay, there's something here. And I don't know what happened on that night. But I know in the reaction that's going on right now that for the integrity of the court, as well as any of its future rulings, Brett Kavanaugh cannot sit on the Supreme Court. I think we need to withdraw his nomination, which is sad for me because I was an enthusiastic supporter. And we need to actually have somebody who's a conservative who will not have these types of allegations trailing them.
But why does it have to be that black and white? You know, I looked at Matt Miller on Twitter earlier saying you either believe Ford or you believe Kavanaugh. Does it have to be that black and white? Can't you simply say this is one of the most important appointments in our government, in our country? Let's just put a pause on it and hear, because if he is as great a judge, as great of a character as he says he is, then this will play itself out. Why not say, let's listen to this a moment?
I agree, and I would just disagree with saying that Kamala and Cory clown themselves. But here's the thing. We have to examine and vet this. It's not a question of, as you said, black and white. Her coming forward, we need to hear all the details of what she has to say. He has a right to respond. But by the same token, he hasn't been appointed to animal control. He's been appointed to be on the Supreme Court for a lifetime. And this, to me, is very similar to the evidence that Sheldon Whitehouse and others were trying to get from him on the issue of gambling. You see, because if this type of thing happens, and let's say it's a one-time incident, well, what stopped it? What's going to prevent you from doing it again? Did you get any type of therapy, Mr. Kavanaugh? I mean, so it's not black and white at all. It is just that complicated. And I'm not saying this to plug my other job, but you know how many calls I got this morning on the radio before I came over here from women victims and therapists? And this should disabuse people of the notion about women keeping this a secret and waiting to hold it to announce it at a time like this. There is something about this type of experience, and I learned about this morning, that makes it difficult for you to talk about it. Her coming out 20 or 30 years later is characteristic of this type of experience. Women called and said, I had a therapist say this, and people can Google this if they want to learn about this today. But the instinct or the bodily chemicals that animals have to kind of put things aside and move on to the next thing, even
how
when they're
women
attacked.
forget what childbirth is like.
Right.
Yes.
Human beings don't have that. And it can take the smallest thing. A woman called and told me she heard a song on the radio that reminded her of what had happened, and it triggered her coming out and talking about it. We are in the Me Too era. These matters are being litigated. You cannot be a judge who's going to hear these matters potentially, or oversee matters that will have been heard, that will be appealed, that will go to the Supreme Court, and you have a conflict of interest when you've done the very same thing and been so dismissive of it.
Hold on, I want to bring Jill in.
He must withdraw.
We are in the Me Too era, but if you look at Twitter, for example, when a woman comes forward, if it's 10, 20, 30 years later, even if it's immediately after, the absolute character assassination she goes through and how brave you you have to be to do such? Casey mentioned it earlier, but I want to bring it back. I want to play what Susan Collins told CNN about these allegations just last night. Please listen.
I obviously was very surprised, and it's an issue that I brought up with him last Friday, and he denied, as he did in his written statement. That's really all I have to say at this point.
Do you believe the accuser?
I don't know enough to make a judgment at this point.
Okay, she doesn't know enough to make a judgment. She could know more. And I need to remind our audience, she knew enough to tell Al Franken to step down. Jill,
Amen.
All senators are under pressure, but what position does this put Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski in?
I mean, they're obviously in a very difficult position. As the two kind of more moderate members of the party, they are accountable to constituencies that do want them to be pro-woman, that do want them to not be these kind of far-right, typical misogynists. They're also women, and, I think that this is unfair. I think we should expect that male senators are just as accountable to women as female senators are. But the reality is that Collins and Murkowski are being held to a slightly different standard because of their gender. So Collins is right. Maybe she doesn't know enough. And so give the woman the opportunity to testify. Give senators the opportunity to ask her questions and to be able to fully assess and vet this nominee. This has been a remarkably opaque process. Kavanaugh has not been a particularly transparent nominee to the court. And this is one more example of one of those skeletons that, frankly, I wish it had come forward earlier. But now that we know, the senators do have an absolute obligation to the American people to make sure that they are doing their due diligence on this man who's going to have a lifetime appointment.
If the nomination, Evan, is withdrawn, how big of a deal is it for the president and Republicans to start over? Because Brett Kavanaugh was not a guy Mitch McConnell put through. And you could love or hate Mitch McConnell, but he's a strategic beast. And when he wants to get something done, he gets it done. And clearly, they're in a bit of a pickle here.
It's a big deal. It would very much upset the base, but it also depends upon who do they replace him with.
Well, why didn't Mitch McConnell pick Brett Kavanaugh?
Well, Mitch McConnell didn't pick Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah, why didn't he?
Because he was not the president of the United States, and the president nominates, and I'm sure Mitch McConnell gave his input.
But hold on. But President Trump didn't think of Neil Gorsuch. Mitch McConnell put him forward.
And I also know that Don McGahn was a fan of Neil Gorsuch, and John McGahn is also a fan of Brett Kavanaugh. And there are plenty of other conservative judges out there throughout the country who would fit the mold of what would excite the conservative base, excite people like me who are no big fans of Trump. In fact, I actually sync up with Donald Trump most on judicial appointments. And that's why it's so painful to watch this happen to Brett Kavanaugh and to Dr. Ford, whom I'm starting to believe much more and more the more I think about it. I think the important thing here is there's a political risk we aren't talking about for Republicans, which is if we try and fast track this and move through this as fast as possible and put Brett Kavanaugh on the court, not only are we going to have a decent size of the population questioning the legitimacy of the rulings coming from the Supreme Court and the character of somebody on the Supreme Court, just like they have with Clarence Thomas.
Really, do you think anyone who backs Brett Kavanaugh or who is a Republican who voted for Trump, do you think you did not support Donald Trump? No. Do you actually think this changes a Republican's vote?
I think it could change a Senator Susan Collins, a Bob Corker, a Jeff Flake, maybe a Tim Scott. I think maybe a Ben Sasse. I think there's something happening where people are looking at it. But the political calculus is we already are accused of having a war on women. And you've seen how well we govern, which is not well at all. So we can't even, so that proves that we don't have a war on women, but it reinforces the narrative. And when you've seen women come out to the polls and register in historic numbers since President Trump was elected, this could be a slap in the face and ultimately feed the anger and retribution that women are going to bring in November.
A war on women, excuse me. Isn't Ivanka Trump completely laser beam focused on the advancement of women and girls? Didn't she? She hasn't. Yeah. And she hasn't spoken up 1 ounce on this, which blows my mind. All right, Mark, we could say all day long this is the Me Too era. Things are different. Look at the Women's March. Or are Republicans banking on sort of the Clarence Thomas model again?
Well, they can't, because literally the Clarence Thomas model, as despicable as it was, he played the Emmett Till card. Remember, he said it was a high-tech lynching. And that was to draw a relationship. Emmett Till was accused of doing something to a woman, just whistling, as a matter of fact, and he was lynched for it. And that scared, obviously, the Democrats in power from bringing forward more accusers when it comes to Clarence Thomas. Kavanaugh's not a black man. He can't say what Clarence Thomas said. So I don't think that applies at all. We saw what happened with Roy Moore. He went down in flames in a very, very similar situation.
Hold on. He went down in flames when people voted. But the GOP supported his nomination. The president stood with him.
True. But the question I thought you were asking, Evan, though, and what I'm reading into it, is that the majority leader did not want Kavanaugh for a reason, Mitch McConnell. I'm curious to know what that reason is. It could have
He's
been,
no dummy.
Right, and it could have been, he may have known about this, he may have known about the gambling accusations, among other things. He knows that there are problems with him. So I think that alone is an indication that he's in very, very serious jeopardy. And not only does he need to withdraw, they may choose to withdraw him. It's telling that Kellyanne Conway is saying what she's saying. Now, we know Trump is schizophrenic. He might tweet something else today. But it's meaningful that she's saying what she's saying. That this is bad. There is a war on women. We know that. This is going to be costly. They may lose the Senate because of it.
All right, Jill, you know this hearing better than the rest of us. A spokesperson for Joe Biden, who was the chair, let's remember that, the chair of the Judiciary Committee during the Clarence Thomas confirmation, moments ago released this statement, quote, Vice President Biden believes Professor Ford deserves a fair and respectful hearing of her allegations, and that the committee should undertake a thorough and nonpartisan effort to get to the truth wherever it leads. The vote should be postponed to allow this to happen appropriately, because this is an appointment for life to the nation's highest court, and getting the decision right is more important than getting it done on a rushed timeline. All right, I just said it before. Given what happened with Clarence Thomas, what do you make of this?
Well, I'm glad that, decades later, Joe Biden seems to have learned that lesson, since he was not exactly helpful in the Anita Hill accusations. That said, it's not 1991. The Anita Hill testimony, it completely reshaped our understanding of sexual harassment in the workplace. The Me Too movement has completely reshaped our understanding of not just sexual harassment, but sexual assault and even the more kind of subtler abuses that women face in work and in our personal lives. So we're operating in a completely different context now, and I just don't see how Republicans get out of this in a way that doesn't cost them. I think it's particularly going to cost them in the midterms. They might lose the Senate. And frankly, I think you're just going to have a lot of folks stay home. So the Republican base stay home, while you will also have a lot of women who see how the Republican Party has treated women over and over and over again, who will turn out, who will vote, and who are increasingly running for office. And so I really see this moment not just as important and transformational right now, but as really the beginning of a new era in politics where women are truly ascendant.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.